The moment that changed everything didn't happen on a pitch. It happened in a boardroom, behind closed doors, when a number was written down that football had never seen before. £1 million. It sounded absurd, dangerous, even, and the man attached to that number wasn't a global superstar. Not yet. He was just a striker from Birmingham, a finisher with instinct, movement, and a quiet confidence that didn't scream for attention. But overnight, Trevor Francis became something else entirely. A symbol, a risk, a question. Was he worth it? That question followed him everywhere. Into every stadium, every touch, every missed chance. And what most people didn't realize was that from that moment on, Trevor Francis wasn't just playing football anymore. He was carrying the weight of the game itself. Long before the headlines, before the £1 million tag, before the scrutiny, there was just a boy in Birmingham. Not the glamorous side of English football, not the polished academies we see today. This was working class England, where football wasn't just a dream. It was survival, identity, escape. Francis didn't grow up with hype. He grew up with expectation of a different kind. The kind where talent had to prove itself quickly or disappear entirely. And he proved it early. At Birmingham City FC, he wasn't just another academy player. He stood out immediately, not because he was louder or flashier than everyone else, but because he understood space in a way that didn't make sense for someone his age. He moved like he already knew where the ball was going to be before anyone else did. Coaches noticed. Teammates noticed. Defenders learned quickly. He made his debut at just 16 years old. 16 in an era when football was brutal, unforgiving, and physically relentless. And he didn't just survive it, he thrived in it. Goals came naturally, almost casually, as if the chaos of English football didn't quite apply to him. By the time he was a teenager, he wasn't just promising, he was inevitable. But inevitability comes with attention, and attention brings pressure. As Francis grew into one of the most exciting young forwards in England, the whispers started. Big clubs were watching. Bigger expectations were forming. He wasn't just a talent anymore. He was becoming an asset. And in the late 1970s, football was changing. Money was starting to creep into conversations in ways it hadn't before. Transfers weren't just about footballing decisions anymore. They were statements. Then came Brian Clough. Clough wasn't just any manager. He was a force of personality, a man who believed he could turn confidence into trophies and arrogance into dominance. At Nottingham Forest FC, he had already done the impossible, turning a provincial club into champions of England. But he wanted more. He wanted Europe. He wanted legacy. And he believed Trevor Francis was the missing piece. The deal that followed would rewrite football history. Officially, it was structured carefully, avoiding the headline figure. But everyone knew the truth. £1 million. The first time any club had paid that much for a player. And just like that, Francis became the most expensive footballer in the world. But what happened next shocked everyone. Because instead of crumbling under the pressure, instead of shrinking beneath the weight of expectation, Trevor Francis delivered almost immediately. Not in small moments, not in quiet performances, but on the biggest stage possible. The European Cup final 1979. Picture it. Munich. The lights, the tension, the magnitude of it all. Nottingham Forest, still outsiders in the eyes of many, facing Malmö. And there, in that moment, it was Francis who made the difference. Rising above defenders, timing his run perfectly, meeting the cross with precision. The goal that won the European Cup. That was the answer, or at least, it looked like it. For a moment, the narrative flipped. The gamble had paid off. The price tag seemed justified. The critics went quiet. Because how do you argue with a man who delivers the biggest prize in club football? But football doesn't work like that. It never has. Because what most fans didn't realize was that one goal, as iconic as it was, didn't erase the expectation. It amplified it. Now Trevor Francis wasn't just expected to be good. He was expected to be decisive. Every game, every moment, forever. And that's a different kind of pressure. Behind the scenes, something more complicated was unfolding. Francis wasn't a natural showman. He didn't crave the spotlight the way some players did. He wasn't loud, wasn't controversial, wasn't constantly chasing headlines. And that, strangely, became part of the problem. Because when you carry a record-breaking price tag, people expect a personality to match it. He didn't give them that. Instead, he kept playing, scoring, contributing, winning. Nottingham Forest went on to win back-to-back European Cups. Think about that. A club that had barely been considered elite, suddenly dominating Europe. And Trevor Francis was part of that story. But narratives in football are rarely fair. Because despite the trophies, despite the goals, despite the moments, the question never fully went away. Was he worth it? It followed him through every dip in form. Every missed chance became bigger. Every quiet game became louder. And slowly, almost invisibly, the weight of that question started to shape the way people saw him. Then came the moves. Francis didn't stay in one place long enough to build a single, defining legacy. He moved across clubs, across countries, from England to Italy with Sampdoria, where the game was slower, more tactical, more demanding in a different way. Then to Atalanta BC, adapting again, adjusting again, constantly proving himself in environments that didn't always suit his natural game. And here's where the story gets complicated, because while some players benefit from stability, from systems built around them, Trevor Francis spent much of his career adapting to systems built for others. He was versatile, intelligent, capable of playing multiple roles. But versatility in football can be a double-edged sword. It makes you valuable, but it can also stop you from being defined. And football loves definition. Fans want clear narratives, heroes, icons, legends tied to one club, one identity, one story. Francis didn't quite fit that mold. He was successful, undeniably so, but he wasn't easily packaged, and that made him harder to celebrate in the way some of his peers were. Then there was England. International football should have been his stage, his moment, his chance to silence every doubt on a global scale, and yet it never quite happened the way it should have. Tournaments came and went, opportunities appeared and faded, performances were solid, sometimes excellent, but never quite enough to dominate the narrative. And in England, narratives matter. Players are remembered not just for what they do, but for when they do it, the big goals, the defining moments, the tournament heroics. Francis had glimpses of it, flashes of brilliance, but not the sustained, headline-grabbing dominance that locks a player into national mythology. But here's the part most people miss. Trevor Francis played in an era of transition. Before the Premier League money, before global branding, before footballers became commercial empires, the £1 million fee that once defined him would, decades later, look almost symbolic. Players would be sold for 10 times that, 20 times that, 100 times that. And suddenly, the pressure he carried starts to look different. Because being the first is never the same as being one of many. There's no precedent, no blueprint, no one to learn from. You become the experiment, the test case, the risk that everyone watches to see if it works. And in many ways it did, but not in the clean, simple way people expected. Francis didn't become a global icon in the modern sense. He didn't dominate headlines for a decade. He didn't define an era the way some of his contemporaries did. But he did something else, something quieter, but just as important. Proved that football could change. That players could carry financial value beyond anything the game had seen before. That clubs were willing to take risks at a level that would reshape the sport. That the ceiling had been broken. And that matters. Because every transfer that came after, every record broken, every headline about astronomical fees, traces back to that moment, that decision, that gamble, that £1 million gamble. And maybe that's where the real answer lies. Because if you judge Trevor Francis purely by goals, by trophies, by statistics, you'll find a career that was very good. Sometimes excellent, occasionally brilliant. But if you judge him by the weight he carried, by the expectations he absorbed, by the role he played in changing the economics of football, the story becomes something else entirely. He wasn't just a player. He was a turning point. And turning points are rarely comfortable places to exist. By the time his career began to wind down, the game had already started moving in the direction he helped create. Bigger deals, bigger expectations, bigger narratives. And the players who came after him would benefit from a system that had already been tested on him. So did he live up to the hype? It's the wrong question. Because hype assumes a fixed outcome, a clear path, a measurable success. But Trevor Francis was operating in unknown territory. There was no definition of success at that level of expectation, no benchmark for what a £1 million player should be. He had to invent it, and maybe that's why his legacy feels different. Not louder, not more celebrated, but deeper, more structural, more embedded in the way football works today. In the end, Trevor Francis didn't just justify a price tag. He redefined what a price tag meant, and that's something far bigger than hype. Because long after the goals are forgotten, long after the debates fade, long after new records replace old ones, the impact of that moment, that transfer, that gamble, still shapes the game we watch today. And whether people realize it or not, every time a transfer fee shocks the world, every time a player is labeled too expensive, every time expectation becomes a burden rather than a privilege, they're echoing the same question that followed him all those years ago. Was he worth it? And the truth is, football is still trying to answer.